there are many, many rites of passage throughout our lives, and one of the biggest for sure, especially when we're young, is getting your driver's license and just that amazing amount of freedom that goes along with that. Can you guys all remember that? Once upon a time, I know that, way back when, on my 16th birthday, I was at the Secretary of State's at 9 a.m. Probably with several girlfriends, probably doing things we shouldn't. I don't know, but just saying. Um, as we get older, driving starts to become more of a chore. I know that I had 3 children. They were all involved in many, many sports and activities. And there were literally years that I felt like I lived in my vehicle. Can any of you relate to that? Yeah. Well, now that my youngest is officially semi-launched at Michigan State, I'm excited to, no longer be driving with people squabbling in the back seat or worrying about somebody putting a piece of a Pop-Tart in the place where the CDs should have gone, all of that stuff. And I'm actually starting to enjoy driving again on most days, but not always. So driving can be pretty challenging. Of course, all of us that live in Michigan know that we have 2 seasons. One is winter and one is construction, right? Neither of those are fun to drive in. And I've really found that as I do get older, depending on the day, certainly there are times when driving is truly exhausting. It really is a very physical activity. And so this idea is that if our bodies are compromised in any way, driving simply becomes harder. So for all of you who are here today, you would have driven on the East Beltline. You probably did a Michigan left, right? People from other states are like, what on earth is that? I'm like, it's a Michigan left. That is stressful in itself. So there's a lot of items that simply, as we get older, become more challenging. And so today we're going to focus on how these changes in our bodies can truly affect our driving, our skills, the ease of it, the enjoyment of it, and most importantly, the safety of it. Because for all of the topics that we handle here in this series, the idea is we give you the information to make the important personal choices that are right for you. But this is one of the few topics that personal choice truly can affect not only the safety for you, but the safety for others. And so we're going to be touching upon just that idea as well, that sometimes we have to make hard choices that are not necessarily the most enjoyable for us, because they really make sense for the safety of ourselves and the safety of others. So with that, I'm going to get started. I'm going to go ahead and let all these gentlemen introduce each other, starting with Omar.
Good morning. My name is Omar Dieppa. I work with the Kent County Sheriff's Office, and I've been there for 10 years.
Good morning. My name is Tom Sikkema, and I am the founder and CEO of Ride Your Way Medical Transportation, and we've been in business almost 7 years now.
Hi, my name is Alistair Lynch. I own an insurance agency in West Michigan with Farm Bureau Insurance, and I've been doing that for about a decade, and we have fun with common sense and logic.
Common sense. Now that's a good thing to start with. So, all right. Well, we're going to start with Omar. So I do have Officer Dieppa written here. He's like, I'm really pretty informal. You can call me Omar, but just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today. I know that it's your time is very valuable. And I just want to start with having you talk a little bit about yourself and what you do on a day-to-day basis for the Kent County Sheriff's Office.
So in my personal life, I've been happily married for 13 years. I've got 4 children. My kids are not in college yet, between 10 and 3. So I have the worry of what they're doing in the back seat, constantly screaming, "Don't do that as we drive." I'm the guy that won't even let them eat a bag of pretzels because I'm worried about the crumbs that are going to fall on the ground. So kudos to you. I'll get there eventually. In my professional life, I started at Grand Valley State University. I was there for 3 years prior to moving over to Kent County Sheriff's Office. I worked road patrol for several years. I trained all the new officers on nights and weekends and holidays. Took a lot of people to jail for making poor choices and had a lot of fun. After starting to have children, my wife begged me to find a day shift spot, and a unique position arose, and it's in our community services division. So I put in for that. I am now working for Ada, Cascade, and Grand Rapids Townships. And I'm kind of the liaison between the sheriff's office, the township, and the residents of those 3 particular townships. So I give out my business card to everybody and say, call me with any small issues you have that I can help you as time allows. I take care of the long-term neighborhood disputes. I always look at it as the road patrol will go and take a call and put a Band-Aid on a big issue, and then I get the phone call with, "Hey, Omar, we need some additional problem solving. Can you go and address this issue a little bit further?" I do a lot of our education. Active shooter trainings, as of recently, has been probably our #1 sought after training. So I teach businesses, churches, the community all about how to react to critical incidents, one of which is the active shooter situations. And then I kind of have my niche at the sheriff's office. I'm part of a group, we're called DREs, so we're drug recognition experts. I'm one of only 149 law enforcement officers in the state of Michigan with that certification, and one of only 25 instructors that have that certification in the state, where I teach people how drugs and other substances can influence the human body, and how we can proactively go out and look for people under the influence of these substances and get prosecution for people if we can prove that their ability was lessened. In addition to that, some of my fun things on the side, I am an instructor at one of our local police academies, where one of the things I teach is introduction to traffic. So I have a lot of experience in this particular realm, and I'm excited to share some of those experiences with all of you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Omar. So we have, in my introduction, I talked a lot about the fact that driving in itself is a really physical activity. So what are some of the physical things that you have seen that directly affect a person's ability to be able to drive?
Yeah, sure. Starting with the #1 is vision, right? One of the things that we get tested when we have to apply for our driver's license. And we're not seeing the people that are out there that are completely blind by any means. I think it's more of the restricted licenses. And in my experience, it's dealing with people that may not be able to drive at night. One particular case I had was we get a broadcast for a vehicle that's all over the road about 1:30 in the morning. We find that vehicle, we follow it just to see whether or not they are able to maintain their lane, and find that it's truly all over. And of course, we're already starting to make assumptions that somebody's drunk driving. And I happened to pull that vehicle over, and it was a senior driver that she was a nurse, she was a traveling nurse, and was leaving Grand Rapids every day to go and help somebody over in Lowell. And in the middle of the night when she's on her way home, despite having a restricted license and not being able to drive at night, she says, "This is really my only option, particularly at this time of day, to get to and from my job." So we'll talk about a little bit later about things that we can do as an agency and as a whole to get them re-examined, but it's kind of a bummer for us because she has somewhere she needs to go. She can't retire yet. She needs to be doing these particular things to maintain her home and her lifestyle. And I have to make that choice on what it is that I can do in that particular instance, and we'll talk about an option we have. Something else we see is hearing. It's obviously extremely important to be able to hear while you're driving your vehicle. One of the things for us is when we're running emergency to a call and somebody absolutely needs help, we use our lights and sirens. So there's been plenty of times where I'm driving 100 miles per hour to get to somebody that needs CPR, and there's somebody in that left-hand lane that's just refusing to get over, and I'm screaming and white-knuckling and yelling at that particular person, and by the time I risk going to the right instead of overtaking on the left, I could see that it's just an elderly senior driver that probably cannot hear that I'm behind them, which is extremely unfortunate. So it's important. Obviously, hearing is one of the big things we want to make sure that you can do. So make sure that if your hearing start to diminish, that we go and get retested to make sure that it's working appropriately. And the last one is just overall physical ability of that person. So it might be the inability to look over your shoulder in your blind spot. It might be the inability to depress the brake instead of the gas pedal. Sounds weird, but about 8 out of 10 calls we take for a vehicle that crashes into a building is going to be a senior driver, and the excuse we see all the time is, I thought I was reaching for the brake pedal and I pressed the gas and up and over the curb I went into the side of PetSmart. So there's a lot of physical things we have to make sure we maintain or we update or check because it's extremely important that we're in good health to be able to do a lot of things while we drive cars.
Great. So we've all dealt with drivers who are really aggressive or downright rude, but how about those drivers who are overly cautious?
Yeah, this
Let's
is
talk about that.
This is interesting. Now, I'm not taking this liability on and telling you guys to be less cautious when you leave here today by any means, but there absolutely is a normal flow of traffic. And what we tend to see, especially with senior drivers, is we become overly cautious. And it might be when we start reaching a signal, we anticipate that it's going to change, and we don't want to slam on our brakes when it turns yellow, so we start braking before we get to the intersection. It could be we fail to pull out onto a street because we want to wait for that car. There's a number of things. I think the number one thing is 10 miles per hour, 15 miles per hour under the posted speed limit. So we've kind of prefaced this whole question with the rude, obnoxious drivers, and yes, they are absolutely out there. There's people that are constantly speeding, that are late to everything, but it really disrupts that normal flow of traffic when vehicles are supposed to be traveling at 70 miles per hour and we have somebody on the expressway going 60. The normal driver, the one that's not normally aggressive, may become aggressive and take risks by overtaking that vehicle in the right lane or honking their horn, getting them to move over just because we're being overly cautious. So again, I love cautious drivers, but there is absolutely an overly cautious driver. And a lot of the times we see it with the brand new drivers that aren't necessarily comfortable with, but more so than not, it's going to be the senior driver.
Okay, you got me with those who are always late for stuff, so really, see, even I learn and internalize stuff from every single talk that we do. So most of us have certainly heard the term driving under the influence. And when we talk about that, our minds automatically generally go to that idea of someone on, now not necessarily an illegal substance, but a controlled substance or alcohol. But what about those that have a prescription that's been given to them by their doctor and they really don't necessarily understand the effects that might have on their driving?
Yeah. So us, in our particular realm of work, we look at the definition of drug a little bit differently. And we say it's the inability of that person to drive a vehicle safely, depending on whatever substance it is. It could be huffing glue. It could be taking an illegal or legal substance. It doesn't matter what it is. There's a charge for us. It's called operating under the influence of drugs, where if we can prove that whatever it is that person consumed prevented that person from driving, if it lessened their ability to drive that vehicle safely, we absolutely have the right to take them into custody. And it's no different than driving under the influence of alcohol. So prescription drugs comes up a lot. We'll stop somebody that's all over the road. We'll run them through field sobriety tests, determine that, yes, you absolutely should not be driving. And when we ask about what drugs they're taking, it's the prescribed medication from my doctor. They told me to take this for whatever it is that they have. And I sympathize with these individuals, but we have to be cautious, right? If you have a prescription medications, that's why they tell you to not operate heavy machinery, or if you feel different than normal, don't drive vehicles, because there is that charge for us to prosecute. So even with the prescription medications, if your doctor tells you to take something in particular, wait a little bit, see how it affects you. Don't drive the first time you take it, and make sure you're doing it as prescribed. If you miss one dose and you take two, it's gonna obviously change the way that you feel. And if we get a call or we spot you and make a traffic stop on you, we absolutely will take you into custody. So we sympathize. Again, we don't want to have to do that, but prescription medications is one of those things that can obviously impair your ability to drive for sure.
Great. Yeah, I can see how that can be scary. Very scary. So walk us through what happens when you as a law enforcement officer pulls over an older driver and feels that that driver, for whatever reason, is no longer the wheel. What are the specific steps that actually happen?
Yeah, so there is a form in the state of Michigan called an OC-88. If you guys want to even take this down, it's going to benefit the rest of you as well.
I'm going to actually pass around 2 sheets. This is that sheet that Omar is talking about. And then I also have some safe driver options. And we're going to be sending these out in an email with the follow-up email once the video is out. But
so what that form is if we believe that somebody should not be driving for whatever particular reason, they've got a medical condition, they've got some physical issues that's going to prevent them from being able to drive safely, we simply submit that particular, it's a PDF form right online. We fill it out and we ship it off to the Secretary of State. And the Secretary of State reviews it, and they will make a determination on whether or not they feel it appropriate for that particular person to get re-examined. And obviously, given the circumstances, they'll determine if they need an eyesight or vision, or if they actually need to go out and do a physical driving test with them, no different than when we had to do it to get our driver's license. So we simply submit that to the Secretary of State. If when they receive it, we'll get a letter back saying, yes, we've got it, we'll look into it, and then it's kind of behind the scenes. We're not necessarily notified further from there what happens. Now, the great thing is we have the ability to do that, and the downfall to it is that example I told you a little bit earlier where that female was all over the road, the nurse at 1:30, we actually got 3 or 4 more calls after that. So that particular day, I happened to call family member, woke up daughter in the middle of the night. Daughter came and picked up mom and took her home. I submitted that form. Secretary of State the next day said, yep, we got it. We're happy to bring her in for a re-examination, but there's some downtime, right? There's a couple weeks that pass before they can get that particular person in, and over those next few weeks, we got 3 more calls around the same time from that same particular person in the same area driving home because she has to work. So it's still dangerous, despite submitting that form and letting the Secretary of State handle it. We still have to let that person drive their vehicle and hope that they don't just look past their restrictions. Yes, we can cite them for driving on a restricted, but again, is that going to stop that person from doing so the next day? Absolutely not. So it takes some time, but that form, it's great. It's open for you guys to submit on a family or a friend. It's open for law enforcement to submit on anybody that we see it necessary for. So again, it's an OC-88. If you just Google OC-88 Michigan, it pops up as a PDF. You fill it out right online, hit submit, and everything's kind of taken care of behind the scenes.
Okay. So what are some personal stories that you might have other than the one that you've already told?
Yeah. So one of my favorite, just because we became great friends, whether she remembers it or not, was an issue I had with a dementia patient. elderly senior driver that this is fun. About 3 in the morning, I'm just driving around doing proactive work. I'm looking for drunk drivers and see this particular vehicle all over the roadway. And I'm like, oop, got one. Happened to stop her. And again, at 3 in the morning, I'm like, hey, you seem lost. Because I'm not going to ask her about drinking at this point. She didn't look like she would be one to be drinking and driving. And she tells me that she is on her way to Ada to get her hair done. So we have a good conversation back and forth. Clearly, I find out later that she's having some mental health issues, of course, dementia. And it took a lot of convincing that it was 3 in the morning, but she was adamant. She says, I like to get there a little bit early. I hate waiting. I don't want to set a bad example for my hairdresser. But she was done to the nines. She looked great. She was ready for that appointment. I happened to talk to her daughter. I called daughter. Daughter has been going through this, hey, Mom, you're not supposed to be driving anymore. And she's been trying to work through that process. But she didn't feel comfortable taking keys from Mom or taking the vehicle from Mom and never consulted with us in law enforcement. So I think this was kind of that, aha, now we have a way to kind of prevent Mom, and hopefully she'll understand that I shouldn't be driving anymore. So the mental health we see it all the time, people that are driving way out of state thinking that they're going somewhere in particular and that they're a long way from home. We get the hair appointment at 3 in the morning. There's a lot of fun stories, but now I keep up with the daughter and we talk about it, and Mom has since relinquished her keys in her vehicle and no longer drives, and daughter's doing a little bit better on making sure that she's getting to and from her appointments at the correct time.
Awesome. Anyone how about wrong way on a one-way or any of those that...
Sure, and I guess that can go back to the whole vision. We tend to see a lot of wrong way drivers if they're not inebriated from alcohol is going to, again, be our senior drivers. One particular instance I took on my way home after a 12-hour shift, it's 5:30 in the morning. I'm 131 northbound, and I come across the only traffic at that particular time on a Sunday morning, which happened to be a pretty bad accident, which led to a fatal. The senior driver, ended up ramping on 131 northbound on 10 Mile, coming southbound, and struck a rapid bus. So obviously I can't have the conversation to figure out what it is in particular, but clearly being a senior driver, it could have been the mental health, it could have been the inability to see the signage appropriately. But unfortunately, she passed, and we can't have that conversation. But we tend to see it too much, where we're having a lot of senior drivers that are causing accidents unintentionally, of course, that I just wish there's ways to prevent things from getting to that extreme a little bit sooner.
Awesome. Omar, thank you so much. We're going to actually skip. I put you guys in order, but that's fine. We're going to skip to Alistair. Alistair, welcome back. You've certainly been a huge part of this series, and he's definitely been somebody that I call one of my tribe, just a resource that I've gone to many, many times for insurance questions of every nature, and he's always been hugely helpful, which is great. So today we're going to pick your brain about the driving habits and how auto insurance is particularly affected as we age. So since I'm a numbers gal, can you start with just some specifics on statistics with driving as we get older?
My son just turned 16 last week, and he may have been driving my pickup up north bird
Good luck
hunting
with
for
that.
the last 5 years, so I wasn't so worried about setting him free. I think he gave every kid in Rockford a ride home last week. But, and then I remember my dad I had a knee surgery, and I had to get a ride home from my dad, and I think even under some anesthesia, I still wanted to help him drive, so, you just never know, right? And so for me, when I look statistically, they say 1 in 5, like 16 to 24-year-olds will get in an accident, 1 in 14 from 24 to 65, then 1 in 10 from 65 to 75, and then it drops. It's kind of a bell curve. It drops back down to 1 in 7 over that age of 75. So, but technology and other things I think have changed things, but it's still a pretty we're a numbers kind of business, and so the actuarians, we call them the fund police, they tend to know what they're talking about just from real data. So
Yeah, definitely. So, assuming that a person hasn't actually had an accident, can age itself ever affect a person's rate directly like it does when we're paying for a 16-year-old driver?
I had a buddy, he's a consumers energy public relations guy, came into my office on 2 wheels a couple years ago. He says, Lynch, I got to get Farm Bureau. I'm like, why? He said, well, my dad says when I get gray hair and turn 40 that your rates can't be beat. And I was like, well, you're probably not far off, but there's each company and carrier has different tendencies and appetites for who they want to insure. Generally speaking, if you got a little gray hair, our rates are cheaper up to about age 85, and then the industry tends to slowly increase rates after the age of 85. Outside of that, you know, there's other factors, right? So for us, the things we look at to control, nobody calls me when their price goes down, by the way. People only call me on price.
I was going to say, does that ever happen?
I've never met somebody because they said, I think I'm underinsured. Can I give you more money, right? So we spend a lot of time in the premium conversation. Technology is pretty cool these days. I have an office on the Lake Shore and an office in Grand Rapids, and zip code 49442 runs from like Muskegon wastewater treatment all the way down M46 into the city of Muskegon. There's a lot of different things that can happen within that zip code. It's really unique. There's car deer accidents on the east end of it. There's crime on the west end. There's just high volume. So technology today, industry carriers are able to micromanage inside zip codes by smaller geocodes. So your zip code is probably one of the biggest factors for your rate, more than anything. If I have somebody that moves from Ada to Lowell, I'm like, crap, I'm going to lose them. They're going, you know, because it makes a big difference for car deer accidents. So, biggest thing is age. There's an insurance scoring model, which is, you know, I don't think it's that accurate personally. I own a business, so I run, you know, 20 grand worth of credit cards a month, and so I look to the credit bureau like a unsafe bet, and so my insurance score is really low. I may have gotten divorced a couple years ago. My daughter turned 16, bought her a car, didn't like my premiums because it doubled. I was like, I wonder if I put her on as a named insured, what would happen to her insurance score? She's never owned a credit card. She barely has a bank account, and her insurance score was almost a third higher than mine. So my attorney wouldn't let me do that, but I was tempted to add her on as a named insured just to save some money. So scoring model is credit. We access a thing called LexisNexis every year. It's basically a credit score and other kind of habits. Like we give a 10% discount if you get a quote from us and then wait 10 days before you buy coverage, because people that come flying in on 2 wheels with all their mail on their dashboard, there's some habits we see. So, but longevity with a company, the longer you stay with, I represent 3 auto carriers. With Farm Bureau Insurance, the longer you stay with us, there's a discount for not moving around. And then age, like I said, is a factor. So my son is not the cheapest one to insure this last week. So.
Well, we have 3 children between the ages of 18 and 25, so my insurance is through the roof right now. And as a mom, I keep resisting the urge to bill our oldest son, who now has more money than we do. And somewhere else. He has his own condo. Send him the darn bill. No, I'm mom. I feel bad. So anyway, let's talk about everybody's favorite subject, liability. So I just read that United States is the most litigious country in the whole world. I can certainly imagine that. I don't know how true that is, but let's talk about the liabilities that older drivers can face, and especially like the example that Omar had given of somebody who's been warned and yet continues to drive, you know, when their driving ability has already been questioned.
Yeah, I think, from the big picture standpoint, when I look at, I just recently insured a couple of trial injury attorneys, and the stuff they post, just got another 200 grand out of this insurance company or whatever, and that they do it every day. They know what to look for. So for me, risk is risk. I don't care what age you are, and I'll get into some of that. But when it comes to some of the things like the OC form that Omar was talking about, unfortunately, I see it monthly in my agency. Somebody comes in, hey, when did you guys move? We haven't. And then here's my tow bill. Something happened to my car, it wouldn't start. It's a 2023. You're like, And then they go downstairs, come back up. Hey, I locked my keys in the car. Can you give me a ride home? And then you get home and the daughter's like, oh, thank God, he's been missing for 2 hours. And you're like, just like you talk about, probably shouldn't be driving. And then just came in last week driving. And I'm like, so, for me, it makes me want to seek that type of thing. Without those types of forms in court, I don't think there's any more risk unless you've got some sort of eyewitness that can give some sort of character reference on mental health. But it's pretty wild. I got a guy went to his car, 3 different cars he tried. Then I called the son and, well, he had a surgery. His memory's not so good. I'm like, I know, but I think people are selfish when their parents get older. They don't want to become the taxi. So they just turn the blind eye. And ultimately, unless a lot of people know about that in the if you look at medical records where a doctor, recommends you shouldn't be driving, something like that, liability-wise, I don't think there's any more risk. But
Gotcha. That's kind of interesting because it seems like there could be in the court of law if it came down to it and there was an accident. But
right. But I would say of all the things I look at on an auto insurance declaration daily, liability is probably the most incorrect coverage that most people have. And sometimes it's the cheapest thing to adjust. Some carriers don't want to pay big lawsuits, so they give you a pretty funny TV commercial. They get you in the door with a cheap price, and then when you actually need to use it, it doesn't work. And so my dad, he was like an international VP of operations of some big chemical company, and who's your first client? Your second client? Hey, Dad, right? So I was like, what happened to your rates? He's like, oh, they went way down. I went in and they saved me money. And I'm looking at his declarations, and he's got the state minimum that you could cover yourself for a lawsuit was $20,000. And so now it's 50, which that doesn't get you very far. So I always tell people there's a 10-page asset interrogatory that all my trial injury buddies are pretty good at filling out. If you got a rich uncle, you got a nice house, you got a good pension, qualified assets, cash in the bank, boats, cottages, right? All that stuff's on the table if you have a bad day. And a lot of people say, well, it won't happen, but it can. I know an attorney that used to represent, she worked for Seacrest and Wardle in Grand Rapids, and she used to represent insurance carriers if they were suing or getting sued. And she punched me in the arm one night at a restaurant. She's like, Lynch, you're with Farm Bureau. I love those guys. And I didn't know why. And she's like, well, I said, what's the deal? And she's like, well, you guys have the right liability coverage out the gate. Like, not knocking a carrier, but Allstate is famous for insuring a $900,000 house, and they give you $100,000 of liability. Well, if they can take your house, you should at least probably have generally the value of your house in coverage. And so for us, we just do the math quick. Are they gonna take your house? Probably not. Are they gonna take your qualified retirement? Probably not. But as my friend Sarah at Seacrest and Wardle says, they can do anything they want. So to me, turn down your furnace, buy an Afghan, and get your insurance limits where they should be, right?
Yeah.
Or raise your deductibles, right? Or don't pay for your kids' insurance anymore.
no.
Sorry.
I know our youngest was in the house this morning. He's like, Mom, can I take XYZ? I'm like, of course, take anything you want. My husband's like, what? No, tell him to buy his own. So,
There's
old
a thing,
habits die young.
Yeah, right. There's a thing called a liability umbrella policy. It gives you an extra $1 million of coverage if you're ever sued. I call it lawsuit money. They're like 180, $200 a year for most carriers. So I always tell people the value of a human life and a fatality is 1.2 million. So if you don't have 1.2 million, make sure your liability limits match kind of what you're worth on paper. So
Alistair, how often do you recommend that people talk with their insurance carrier or somebody like you? You know, is it an annual basis? I mean, I know one of the things in real estate with the house values going up so much, I guarantee that there's a lot of people out there that are likely underinsured in their homeowners, and I'm sure that there are equal things within auto insurance that, just like you said, you know, how do you really check that?
with with the no fault reform in auto, there's some huge gaps in coverage that rewind before no fault reform. If you hit a driver, like a teenage driver, or if you sold everything you own and went and lived with your kids and you were never listed on an auto insurance policy, your mail didn't come to the house, it went to a PO box, and nobody knew that you lived at that address and you were in an accident in your daughter's car, they would backdate to the date you moved into the house, add you on as a driver, and then give you unlimited medical for the rest of your life. Now, if you do something like that, zero. They'll deny any coverage if you're hiding drivers or if you're not listed properly on auto insurance. Kids that go away to college, they decide they want to register to vote in Ingham County because the Register of Deeds was cool. Like, they change that address and they're not listed as a named insured. If there's no insurance policy that's mailed to the address they live at, there's no medical coverage now for things like that. And there's a ton of lawsuits that we're watching and waiting to see what happens. So I just tell people, when in doubt, I'd be picking up the phone when you get the renewal packet and just making sure. Used to be certain companies covered car accidents, ones that don't that you might know now, Meyer Corporate, Steelcase, Herman Miller, Gordon Foods, their health insurance gives you zero coverage for a car accident. And people switch jobs and they don't tell you. And sometimes you have to change your coverage to make sure that you get a medical bill paid, which turns out those aren't cheap.
Right, and that was part of the question too, because of course, requirements of insurance vary drastically from state to state. And can you explain how that works? The difference between how an insurance company may or may not pay for physical injuries sustained in an auto accident versus, how they might pay for something their regular insurance would pay for a physical injury that was sustained somewhere else, how that changes.
Most of the time when people retire, their health insurance comes from some sort of government entity through the VA, Medicare, Medicaid, and none of those policies cover car accidents specifically. So if you have if you live in Michigan and you are retired, my advice is always to have on your auto policy, have primary medical, unlimited coverage. There's my top 5 list I'll get to, but if you go to Arizona for the winter, if you go to Florida, you go to Canada for the winter, your Michigan no-fault medical will cover you wherever you go. And so if for some reason you're I have probably 1,700 clients, 2 of them opted out from unlimited coverage. I made them sign a form that said I didn't agree with it because there's so many gaps in coverage. Like, there's a Medicare opt-out, there's a Medicaid $50,000 limit. While you're in the hospital, they're great. The minute you go home, you need a wheelchair ramp, you need good attendee care, you need any of that kind of stuff after you go home, good luck. So huge gap there. And then other people are just lowering their limits. So back to my liability comment, you can sue people in Michigan now for medical bills. So some guy next door to you can't afford his car insurance, drops it down to the $250,000 limit. Tom worked at the hospital, he knows. I spent 10 days at Spectrum because I broke my back mountain bike, and it was like $5,000 for the ambulance, $50,000 for the surgery, and like $150,000 just to eat Jello and drink Sprite for 10 days. You're like, that's a lot of dough. And so for me, I'm like, why risk $180,000 a year to save money there where it could really ruin you? So, you go with the unlimited coverage, you're good anywhere in the country. But just be aware that the people driving next to you might not have that same coverage. And so that's another reason to get the liability up. And for me, all those things when you go home, I have some friends that own a in-home healthcare business and they work a lot with Mary Free Bed. And so I know what they charge a month, so.
Yeah, medical bills are absolutely crazy. So when someone has actually had an accident, especially an older driver, can you, as an insurance company, require them to do a safe driving course?
We don't. We simply work off technology dumps into our computers a motor vehicle report. So if we see points, at fault claims, things like that, then you end up on the naughty list. Past that, we can't control what could happen. We just have to work off what did happen.
Gotcha. So the naughty list basically raises your rates, but not necessarily requires something of you.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay, great. We hear a lot these days about the different safety features that are available in vehicles. So do you feel like some of those new safety features, such as blind spot detection, lane departure systems, that see those as being effective, especially for older adults? And have you seen some of those to be really, really good?
There's an app that we offer that everybody's against because they think Big Brother's watching. And I'm like, they already are. I think one of the companies sold the data from like OnStar to insurance industry. I got on the naughty list for that. But if somebody ever offers you a safe driving plug-in app, anything like that, it's not to raise your rates or lower your rates. It's so when you do end up in court and they sue you for $1 million and they say you were driving 150, they go, no, he was only going 73. So I wouldn't be afraid of some of those tools. They're good savings. So that's the technology I do appreciate. My son's got a 2011 car, and he was mad he didn't have a backup camera. And I was like, well, you could just, turn your head. But, I rented a car a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to turn everything off because I went to change lanes. I'm like, the power steering's messed up. And it wasn't. It was just trying to stop me from changing lanes. And there's some pretty cool stuff out there. I may have drove a Suburban through Howell on 96 with my hands off the wheel to test my lane detection system on my Suburban, and it worked pretty good. But there's actually a detriment to that. Go to Van Eck Auto Body or Car Center Collision and ask those guys how much it costs to fix a car today. It's outrageous to recalibrate all these sensors and stuff. So net end result, you'll probably pay more for insurance long term for a minute, but the technologies, like I insure some Teslas, and the rate's not bad. I was surprised. Like I always figure $600 every 6 months should be a good price for a full coverage vehicle, and the Teslas are usually $450. So there must be some thought behind that stuff being effective. But sometimes there's just too many buttons. I think it's distracting. So
I had one of those plug-in things in my car, and the darn thing kept beeping at me, so I threw it away.
Oh, yeah. I get guys that call me all the time. They're like, Alistair, I did not do a jackrabbit start yesterday at the corner of Hall and Sheridan. I'm like, take the app off, give me $300 and move on, right? So.
Alistair's getting ready to redo our personal insurance, and I basically said, I will pay the extra money. I do not want that thing in my car, but that's just me. All right, so we're going to go ahead. Alistair, before we move on, do you have any personal other stories that you wanted to share that kind of specifically relate to, older drivers?
I think underestimating the power of the legal system these days. I think I see it all the time. Like I said, I got these, I think they're my buddies still, I'm not sure. They send me a letter once in a while, like, we're suing your client for $2.8 million. And you remember taking the call the year before. It was in a Walmart parking lot. It was bumper to bumper, no known injuries. And all of a sudden you're getting this big letter that says this, right? We're suing you for everything you own, and more so. So we have an email that comes out every Friday. It's a list of large losses. It's our top 10 settled claims just at Farm Bureau. We're only in Michigan, and our 52-week running average is over 2.2 million. And it's car accidents, it's fires and things like that. But there's always one or two in there where you just don't think that you could get sued for that much money, and it's real. So it's a big deal, especially I hear you baby boomers have a lot of money, like, and so the attorneys, I think they probably know that too. So they're going after things they shouldn't be. So I guess it's just a broad spectrum thing. Like I had a case, and I'm just gonna add in things to watch out for. So my estate planning attorney always gives me these tips, like if you're jointly deeded on your house, you shouldn't jointly title your vehicles because then it's harder to come at some of your assets. So get your kids off your policies. Even if you got to buy them their own policy, get them off. You're opening yourself up for stuff. I have a case where a guy I know in Cedar Springs owns a manufacturing company. His daughter went to Grand Valley, got the tickets, kicked her off. She went and bought her own insurance. I do a lot with mortgage work, and so most people under the age of 30 don't talk to people, so they buy things on the computer, and they don't know what they're buying. So she bought the worst coverage possible, hit a girl that was going to med school, pulling out of Grand Valley, and that girl was going to go to school to be a surgeon. She can't perform that now, and so she got sued for future wage loss. They won the last lawsuit. Since dad was titled on the vehicle, dad has a $3,500 a month wage garnishment for the next 20 years, just like child support. So it's real stuff. And it's like I said, some companies don't want to pay big lawsuits, so you got to find the ones. I could give you the names of the ones that are good. Usually there's some gray-haired dude and shingles above them. If you want to buy insurance from someone, make sure it's a real person, and they tend to do things the right way, I found.
Yep,
So
yep.
that's my story.
No, good. I agree with that. And I'm a big proponent of working with people that you can see. When Alistair comes to review our insurance, it will likely be at our kitchen table. So I think that speaks volumes right there. So, all right. So with that, I'm going to move on to Tom, and it's so nice to have you here today. Tom and I are actually both part of a senior advocacy council where a number of senior businesses get together and network on how we can better serve people. And recently I had the opportunity to hear his personal story, which was just really, really compelling. So before we get into that, tell us a little bit about, what your company does and what brought you to starting that company in the first place.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to make a long story short and summarize the last 11 years of my life. But at Ride Your Way, our mission is to remove barriers that prevent people from living their best life. And we do that by empathetically providing a way for people to access the world. So we have a fleet of we're going on 25 vehicles now, with 2 different offices, one in Grand Rapids and then also one in East Lansing. And we provide transportation for individuals who have mobility challenges, if they're utilizing a wheelchair, or individuals that just need a little extra assistance. They can get in and out of a vehicle, but might just need an extra helping hand to get to and from doctor's appointments. We also do non-medical outings, weddings, family events. Open houses are huge in the springtime. Date nights, whatever it might be, we're able to assist individuals to and from those events. So to kind of share a little bit more about my story personally, back on May 14 of 2013, so we're coming up on 11 years now, I was diagnosed with a rare type of pediatric brain cancer. So I was, again, 17 years old at the time. I was sitting in my chemistry classroom, and it was the absolute best excuse to get out of chemistry. I had an appointment. I was having some mental health issues, which was very unrealistic and really out of character for me, out of nowhere. And so found myself at an outpatient clinic, was evaluated. 5 minutes later, the psychologist said, "Hey, this doesn't seem right. I think you need to go to your pediatrician." So we took a quick trip down the road, went to my pediatrician's office. He evaluated me and said, "Yeah, let's go down to Helen DeVos and get a scan done." So again, another hour later, I was sitting inside of a CT machine in the emergency department at Helen DeVos, and it's never a good thing when the doctors come in and say, "Hey, we're going to get an MRI done." So I had an MRI done, again, another hour later, and by about 6 o'clock that night, I was diagnosed with cancer. So I underwent a pretty intense brain surgery, 4 rounds of inpatient chemotherapy, and then 5 weeks of outpatient radiation over about a 7-month time span. So really ruined a lot of my summer plans, but so that whole experience in my life, I was exposed to the healthcare industry, all of the nurses, doctors, support staff that took care of me at the Children's Hospital was absolutely incredible. Kind of a side note, it's pretty incredible that we have as much as we do here in Grand Rapids, where we were getting consults from hospitals all over the world, MD Anderson, Mayo Clinic, and everybody said that, the best place that you can possibly go is 15 minutes away from your house. So through all of that, I, again, saw, I have a huge love for the healthcare industry and especially nursing. So being 17 years old, I was trying to figure out what the heck I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And, spending a lot of time at the hospital, decided that I wanted to become a registered nurse. So after that, went to nursing school at Grand Valley and, 4.5 long years later, became a registered nurse and worked on the same floor that I was actually treated on. So worked alongside of the oncologist that was taking care of me, a lot of the nurses that also took care of me, and got to experience healthcare from not only inside of the bed but at the bedside as well. Backtracking a couple of years, while I was going through nursing school, started to see that a lot of the patients that I was taking care of at the hospital during clinicals were having issues getting from their medical appointments. And a lot of these individuals have chronic illnesses that need really good control, but just because of that transportation barrier, they weren't able to access those healthcare services they really needed. And so I love driving, always loved driving, and started to kind of put the pieces together and started to do some research about other transportation options outside of like the rapid, public transit, go bus, stuff like that. And started to see that the transportation companies that were out there were either EMS companies that were charging $2,000-$3,000 to get to your doctor's appointment, or there were small companies that really weren't providing a high quality transportation solution. So it wasn't really solving any issues. It was poor quality, poor on-time performance, weren't getting you to where you needed to be, and just kind of started thinking there's a better way of doing this. And that's really how Ride Your Way started.
Gotcha. So it really is, there's a critical relationship into people being able to get treated with these chronic illnesses and just that idea of getting from point A to point B.
100%. And then outside of that, why do we go to medical appointments? Why do we want to be healthy and live a long life? It's because of everything that happens outside of those doctor's offices. So spending time with family, spending time with friends, getting to enjoy all of the really cool stuff that's going on here in West Michigan. And, we're doing a disservice to the community not providing a way to access all of that.
Yeah, I agree with that, because just in the stories that we've heard today and from Omar, in terms of that idea of, we understand that all of you and your family members and your parents, your grandparents, you have places that you want to go. And it can be very challenging with that thought of no longer having the independence to take yourself there. And how do we provide safe alternatives so that all of you can still continue to live active, enjoyable lives, getting where you want to go, and yet have it be done in a safe way for all of you and the community. So, what are some of the types of drives that make up the bulk of your business? I know you touched on some a little bit, but what are other services that may not be common, but that you are able to provide when needed?
Yeah, so we specialize in medical transportation. So bringing individuals who might utilize a wheelchair or another assistive device like a walker or a cane to and from doctor's appointments. We also transport a lot of the rides that we do are to and from dialysis, cancer treatments, outpatient clinics, whatever it might be. Truly any medical necessity we're able to transport to. I often say we transport to anything that doesn't require lights and sirens. So EMS has its place. I don't want to get into that. They're incredible people, and we have 2 incredible companies, 3 incredible companies in the area that provide that type of service. But for anything that's non-emergent, that's where we kind of step in. Outside of that, again, like I said, the non-medical outings is also a large part of what we do, because a lot of the companies here in the area will only transport to medical necessary treatments, and then there's often, a service area radius around that that's pretty restrictive. So we operate across the state of Michigan. The furthest transport that I've done personally, discharge somebody from Corwell Health right in downtown all the way up to Marquette. Life. So getting that individual home in a timely manner in the highest quality way, that's what we're here to do. So we kind of have a motto within the office. There's never no, it's just yes, this has to be true in order to. So, whether it's a medical appointment, non-medical outing, no matter what barriers are currently in place, it just requires a discussion to remove those barriers and help people, access what they need to.
Great. So I got the first taste of what it was like years ago to have to transport somebody who required a wheelchair. And there's not a lot that scares me, so I'm always like, oh yeah, I can do that. And yet it was really, really challenging, and more challenging than I thought, to be able to get them in and out of the vehicle safely, and making sure that I got them from the seat to their wheelchair and so forth. So what are some of the things that help family members to get over that learning curve of being able to transport people, and where that line is where family is probably in over their heads like yours?
Yeah, so it all comes down to how comfort, a family member is with assisting in that transfer over, let's say from a wheelchair into the back of a sedan. And it all comes down to, again, safety, not only for you all or the individual that's being transported, but also for that family member too. With picking up and having to pivot into the vehicle, there's not only the risk for the individual doing the transfer hurting their back, or another part of their body, but also from the client standpoint, possibly getting dropped to the ground, or again straining their back too, because you're trying to essentially throw them into the back seat. And then from the transportation provider's perspective, there's a lot of safety considerations too. So we've got incredible vehicles with safety devices inside that help, if somebody is utilizing a wheelchair, help them lock them down into that vehicle safely, in a way that, if there was a side collision or front collision, they're, being safely transported in that vehicle. From the transportation provider as a whole, what you want to look out for is what types of policies, procedures, and core processes are these companies using to train their individuals? What types of accreditations or certifications do they have in order to do business in the state of Michigan? And are they doing it to the best of their capability? So no transportation provider's the same. We try to go above and beyond just because of my experience and the type of service that we want to provide. All of our drivers are first aid CPR certified. Everybody gets background checked, motor vehicle record, drug test, DOT physical, and then they go through quality and safety training for a number of weeks. So we want to make sure that we're overkill on the training side, so that way when we're assisting our clients, it's to the best of our capability. There's also a newer accreditation that not many people know about within the industry, that is really setting the best practices and standards for transportation. And so we at Ride Your Way, we're the first company in Michigan and 11th in the nation to achieve this national accreditation. So I'm obviously the most biased guy in the room, but nobody really quite does it the way we do it. And again, it all boils down to safety. So I never personally, I always put myself back in that bed, back at that bedside, or if I was transporting my mother or father or loved one. I never want to put anybody in the position that we're jeopardizing safety for the green stuff at the end of the day. And I want to make sure that, again, our mission to remove barriers, we never want to put more barriers up. We want to just keep breaking them.
Awesome. That sounds great. So, of course, life is super expensive. I just got my first water bill that was over $500 and I about choked. So, people make decisions, obviously, a lot based on cost. So, can you talk a little bit about how do people pay for your service? Is any of it covered under insurance? And what type of range could they expect?
Yeah, so we do everything that we can to bill insurance. I never want to pay, or I never want anybody to have to pay out of pocket for our services. So the nice thing about a lot of insurance plans now, they're starting to transportation as not only for medical necessity, but also non-medical. So if it's going to like a day facility or there's a lot of updates in the Ohio market where people are even being transported to the grocery store, and I did hear a rumor of people actually going to the casino too. So life enrichment activities are extremely important. So there are a lot of insurance companies that are covering non-emergency medical transportation now, not just those $4,000 ambulance bills that come in every once in a while. We have a really good finance department that tries to do as much work on the front end to give you that peace of mind. So whether it's facilitating a conversation with the insurance company or walking you through the process on what questions to ask if you're looking for new insurance or talking to a provider trying to see if you can get coverage. And then at the end of the day, if your insurance company doesn't cover medical transportation for our services, we want to set you up for success. So if it's with another company, kind of help facilitate that process too. Auto no fault is a huge pain in the butt for transportation that we've been trying to navigate, and so we've opened that up as well. And then we also work with 70-plus skilled nursing facilities, continuing life communities across the state. So a lot of them will actually have a budget put aside for transportation too, so we can contract with those facilities directly as well and bill them for services. We're also launching a new loyalty program, which the last point we'll talk about, but to make transportation more affordable and really reward the individuals that are utilizing our services day in and day out. We want to make the overall experience better and also decrease the cost overall.
So what might a typical trip cost, range-wise?
Yeah, so it depends on the distance of the trip. So if we're looking at like a hospital discharge, those start at $50. And then as you go further out, there's a mileage cost as well. So I would say on average, our average cost per ride is about $66. But I mean, if you're looking at, even a non-emergency transport with an EMS company, you're upwards of $200 to $300. I actually did quote out, we assisted with a ride about 2 weeks ago where an ambulance was going to transport somebody about 60 miles and it was going to cost about $4,500. And it was like the highest level of service that we do, and it was going to be about $300 for us.
Wow, that's a big difference. And one of the things too, I just want to think about, obviously owning a vehicle in itself is very, very expensive. And for somebody who might say, well, gosh, a ride can be expensive at $60, if you are ready to forego the cost of owning a vehicle and then use it towards paying for safe transportation, I think that in the end, the cost would very much offset itself.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and our finance team, our director of finance is also my younger brother. So it's a family affair. I've got my younger brother and sister working within the company. So he hates spending money, and he doesn't want our clients to spend money either. So we'll walk through that process with everybody, and make sure that we're we're providing that service and, not breaking the bank either.
Well, and I just wanted to say, I love that if you go on the website for Ride Your Way, there are pictures of all of his drivers, the stats on the miles that they've driven, and really a very large description and detail of your company values, which to me just says a lot.
Yeah, and it all goes back to I sound like a broken record, but it all goes back to me being in that bed and me being at that bedside. So our core values are always be wholehearted, so always do the right thing for the betterment of our community and the people that we're serving. Clear, concise communication, because when communication breaks down, bad things happen. And then just be a good person. Like, that's at the core of what we're doing here. It's all about just being a good person, shining a little bit of light on somebody's day, especially when we're transporting somebody to, let's say, dialysis. We're building those relationships with people because we're transporting them 3 days a week. And it might be 15 minutes per ride, so you're going there and back. You're spending a half an hour a day with somebody that often goes unlooked, and you're just looking at orange cones going by as we're driving down 131. But building a friendship with that person, providing a different level of care that it's not medical, but I truly believe that what goes on between the ears has a big part to do with medical outcomes, and so just being somebody that can be a hearing ear and provide some support during a difficult time is really what we're trying to do. And we transport anywhere from like 180 to 200 people a day all over the state. So that's a lot of barriers that we can remove and a lot of lives that we can change. That would often, again, like I said, dead miles that we're just going by looking at phones. So we want to make it a different experience for everybody and really try to make a positive impact in the community by providing a different level of transportation.
Great, awesome. All right, well with that, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna open it up to questions, so, okay.
I have a question. A friend of mine uses the service to go to the doctors and that. She ran into one that said that even if she didn't drive, she needed car insurance in order for liability to take the service. Is that something you've heard of?
Nope. So that is probably the company not having adequate liability insurance to where they're trying to pawn that off on the client, which it doesn't make sense to me. I would not want to do that as a company owner. We have liability coverage that exceeds the state minimums. With that national accreditation that we have, that holds us to a higher standard. So we're meeting and exceeding those minimums. So that way, when somebody is in our care, they have absolutely nothing to worry about. That liability goes on to us.
We do offer coverage for auto insurance without owning a vehicle. So we have people that maybe have a company car and they'll get just a liability only policy to cover them for the no-fault. It's maybe a couple $100 a year. So there is those options in case for some reason that's something you had to do. So.
I'm gonna go right here.
Is there an additional charge or is it even moving and transport for the patient application?
No additional charge, and we actually,
Yep. Here, I'm gonna go ahead and,
I was asking if it was okay, would they also transport a patient advocate along with the patient who's having the appointment? Does somebody want somebody there?
no, that's a very, very good point.
yeah, so there's no additional charge for any other passengers that want to go along. We actually, we like that because we want to make sure that that person's having a good experience. So whether that's somebody to take notes at the doctor's appointment or just be somebody to, support them during that time, 100%. There's actually one couple that we had transported 6 days a week. This individual went to dialysis Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and he'd have physical therapy on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then they would do some sort of date outing on Saturdays. So Dennis and Melinda, they have both since passed, but we unofficially called them the grandparents of Ride Your Way. They did that 6 days a week for better part of 3.5 years. So again, looking at costs, we're trying to make that, you know, as affordable as possible, because I mean, if you're going out 6 days a week, you know, it can get pricey. So working with insurance, but also, you know, to your point, can other people ride along 100%?
And we're gonna go right here, and then I'll head back there.
Yes, probably for Omar. There is something that really is a thing with seniors, particularly, I have the problem, and that is dehydration. It causes fatigue, shakiness, and so forth, easily controlled, but it's a danger in the car.
Yeah, so obviously everything's at our discretion. So when we pull somebody over, if we see that they're having issues driving, we pull them over. It's all circumstantial, right? So we ask questions. I love asking probing questions to see why it is that they're unable. It's not that we just stop them and just start making assumptions immediately. So if somebody's got an issue where dehydration's preventing them from driving, I mean, I'm happy to offer some help. I'm happy to get somebody there to pick you up. But that OC 88 form isn't just for I don't throw that around. I fill 10 of those a year, if that. So, and again, even if I had filled that out and I sent it to the Secretary of State, they have the ability to say, hey, based on this particular circumstance, we don't feel that person needs to get re-examined. So it's very situational dependent. For that particular thing, I probably would just figure out a solution for that day and then hopefully for the future.
Well, it's just the fact that it's easily controlled.
Sure. 100%. Yep, you bet.
Just a great tip to make sure you're always hydrated. I was gonna head back here. Somebody had a question, then I'll come right back to you.
This question is for, let's see, Tom, I guess. I wanted to know if you have like sort of semi-emergency stuff in your vehicle that you transport, like maybe oxygen or one of those things that could defibrillate somebody, because I mean, things must happen because these people are ill, right? What, you have something like that?
Yeah, yep. So we don't have oxygen on board or AEDs, but we do have CPR masks and then a bunch of other, you know, first aid CPR equipment. So if somebody is, you know, more medically complex or may require a higher level of service, we do ask questions at the time of booking a ride to make sure that it is the right fit, because we want to set them up for success too. So, you know, being an advocate for our clients and, you know, informing them, like, once we're going through the onboarding process, like, hey, you know, based on how we answered the questions, might be good to consider even booking with, you know, an EMS company. But, you know, again, all of the non-emergency medical transportation companies aren't going to have, you know, a defibrillator on the board. That's going to be a level of service that you're going to get through an ambulance. So it's really just identifying what the specific need is and then going through the process to make sure that we're scheduling the right type of transport. So, yeah, so we would push them in the direction of booking with, you know, an ambulance company if that was a specific need. So if their mobility status or their medical necessity required, you know, oxygen or IV fluids during transit, that's going to be something that we're not licensed to do, and we would, you know, point them in the right direction.
At the point where I'm maybe considering not driving anymore, it's not terribly comfortable for me, so I wonder if I can get a safe driver test somewhere.
Yeah, that's a great question. And well, we'll start with, there's actually AARP has a safe driving course, and they have information out there today because I believe it starts this Friday. So stop by AARP, and there are ways, isn't it through the Secretary of State, that you can actually do a safe driving test that you can pay for yourself?
Yeah, and there are online resources that we put our drivers through. It's just a defensive driving course, which can be very helpful too. But yeah, if it's like a on-road test or something like that, probably point this guy right here or the Secretary of State at default.
I won't put you through it, but I'll give you resources.
Okay, any other immediate questions before we move on to our drawing? All right, well, hey, before we do that, please give these guys a All right, so did you all feel like you got some helpful information today?